Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today is Sunday, October the 25th. We are 9 days away now from the elections on November the 3rd. We have reached the single digits at long last. Less than 10 days to go. Obviously, as I said, we are coming out now every day with a senatorial and presidential election prediction video, as we have now reached the 10-day mark. So remember, you have information that I provided for you if you need any help voting. There are a number of websites you can go to. iwillvote.com is the Biden campaign's official sort of voter information site. The Trump campaign doesn't apparently have much of an equivalent to that, but it doesn't take much of a concerted effort as far as Google searches and whatnot to come up with that information. So, but if you do have any questions, even though we're getting down to the wire a bit here, you can always put those down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer them. So let's get right into it. In the state of Hawaii, again in this video, as I said earlier, we're going to sort of begin to really focus in on the swingier states and not spend quite as much time sort of rehashing some of the same details on the safer states. So that's going to leave Hawaii pretty much obsolete. In Alaska, again, we've discussed how there are two other statewide races here. The House race involving Don Young is interesting. He's the oldest member of Congress at 87 years old, just barely beating out Charles Grassley in the Senate. He looks like he's going to be able to win another 2 years. Dan Sullivan, it's not as much of a certainty. Sullivan is struggling a little bit to just kind of stay afloat somewhat against Al Gross, but as of now, I would still expect Dan Sullivan to pull that out. We'll discuss that more in our 9-day Senate prediction. So I still have Alaska as a likely state. Washington and Oregon, as well as California, the whole west coast of the mainland United States, will remain in Joe Biden's column. Now in Nevada, I think the Democrats, again, have some reason to be concerned here, but the last 3-4 days of polling have really helped, I think, sort of stave some of those concerns. For the most part, the polling has been considerably friendly to them, and that alone, I think, is important because this is a state where Republicans are very often overestimated. Okay, remember, people lose sight of the fact, as they do a lot of things about what happened in 2016, that Donald Trump actually led in the state of Nevada by 1 point on election day. Okay. So, it wasn't, that it was very close or that it was sort of a toss up. No, he actually led by 1 point, which I know would still sort of be characterized as a toss up. But the fact that it remains that he was ahead of Hillary Clinton the morning of those elections, whatever Tuesday that was. So the fact, again, we've seen this over and over again. Even Dean Heller, who pretty comfortably lost to Jackie Rosen, even he was overestimated in some of those polls. So if Joe Biden is winning polls by 5-6%, you can pretty much solidify that this is going to work out for them. Again, the concerns stem from a potentially sedated and subdued turnout operation that has been very successful for the Democrats in this state in the past. But I think those will be offset by the fact that this is such an unpopular president and the state as a whole has shifted to the left. So I'm going to label this now likely Democrat. Now, in the state of Idaho, obviously the Democratic Party, as we've talked about, has some of the first signs of life here, but it's not going to really mean anything in this election. And again, I always want to go back to the interesting nature of the state of Utah in this race. Because the final margin here is going to be very interesting, and keep an eye on this state in particular when we're beginning to evaluate the popular vote totals, because let's face it, this is an election that could come down to some court decisions if it's very close. We've heard all kinds of nonsense about, voter fraud commissions and the like and all that stuff. And so if it comes down to something like that, where a court is having to decide, sometimes the winner of the popular vote, the winner of the popular vote in a vacuum, that is not important. But sometimes if it's by a gigantic margin, that could help sort of sway a justice's opinion. In that, well, if it's really a judgment call and you're not necessarily going by a firm statute, it's just sort of a vague law that you're following or interpreting or whatever it may be, then I would imagine a lot more lopsided popular vote win for Joe Biden would lend some credence to his argument. And Utah is going to be an interesting reason why we know he's going to win the popular vote, but the reason he may win with a very big margin is interesting because of this state. So let's break down why. First of all, Mitt Romney is very beloved in this state. And he has said that he did not vote for Donald Trump. He's already voted. Evan McMullin, who got more than 1 out of every 5 votes in this state in 2016, endorsed Joe Biden. Okay, so that's going to carry some weight as well. We know it's an unpopular incumbent, and recently polling in the state has actually not been that unfriendly to Joe Biden. Now, does it mean he will get that big of a share of the vote? Not necessarily, but I think you'll see a lot of third-party votes here. You might get some write-ins here. You might even get some more Evan McMullin write-ins. Who knows? So don't be entirely surprised if Donald Trump only wins like 55-ish kind of percent of the vote here. And so again, this is a state that when we go back and look at the popular vote totals, it's not just going to be gigantic sums in New York and California and what else. It's also going to be in states like this where you come back and you'll say, oh, wait, look, in Utah, Donald Trump really didn't run up the numbers at all. But as a likelihood characterization, we're still going to label it safe. Now, in Arizona, this is a pivotal realignment state for the Democrats. As we know, the Sun Belt is becoming more Democratic. The western portion of the Sun Belt, kind of west of Texas, has also been more friendly to the Democratic Party. Obviously, we know New Mexico is pretty much firmly in their column at this point, but Arizona has shifted far quicker than some of these other states. Georgia, for the Democrats, is sort of a slow slog all the way through, whereas Arizona, they're actually starting to see the results right away. Remember, Donald Trump only won this state with a plurality, okay? What was it, 4 years ago? Right. And so, by and large, he didn't have that much capital to kind of spend already in this state to begin with, and he didn't have that big a margin for error going into this race. And then in 2018, the Democratic Party had a very strong day here. Okay, as of 2018, there are now more Democrats in the United States House of Representatives from this state than the Republicans. They also picked up a Senate seat in which Kyrsten Sinema defeated Martha McSally, who, as you guys know by now, is on the ballot again this time. She's being challenged by Mark Kelly after she was appointed to the open seat by the governor, Republican governor still, Doug Ducey. So Joe Biden has been ahead in this state. What's interesting is that this appears to be a state in which the senatorial candidate is actually helping out the presidential candidate. There's always a little bit of a tug of war going on where sometimes in these elections where you have both a statewide race and a presidential race happening at the same time, there's something like that happening in North Carolina, in another swing state. Montana, you don't really consider a swing state, but it's a similar dynamic. Iowa, there's a similar kind of deal happening there. So Arizona, Mark Kelly, because he's been outperforming Joe Biden, appears to be kind of pulling Joe Biden along with him. Now, that probably stems from the fact that Martha McSally, we know about her approval ratings. They are dismal, they're bad, they're embarrassing, they're woeful. Mark Kelly, of course, is also someone who has tapped into a lot of issues that Republicans and independents and Democrats alike in the state of Arizona are very passionate about, and that's gun control. We've seen that over and over in that state because, of course, what we saw happen in Tucson, Arizona, something that has touched Mark Kelly personally because, of course, his wife is Gabrielle Giffords. So by and large, right now, I still have Arizona in the Joe Biden column. I think it'll be a little tighter than people expect. I'm only going to label it tilt for now. Now, in Montana, on the presidential level, it's not nearly as compelling as it is on the House, gubernatorial, and senatorial level. Again, another potential popular vote state to watch, but again, there just aren't enough votes really coming out of the state to begin with. So it's not going to be that compelling on the presidential level, and neither will Wyoming. Now, in Colorado, as we've talked about before, Colorado and New Mexico are both states that are still often listed and talked about as swing states. I don't really see it that way. I think they're both pretty much in the Democratic Party's column for good now. Okay, Cory Gardner is done in the Senate. He's done. He's out. John Hickenlooper has, I believe, won that race altogether. Okay, all the major powers that be have basically stopped, on both sides, have basically stopped spending in this race altogether. The Democratic Party knows that they're going to pick up this seat, and Cory Gardner at this point is probably already lining up his next employment opportunities. Okay, now look, again, this is a state that, went to back in 2008, this was a state that it wasn't exactly, we weren't totally certain whether or not, this would be a state that the Democrats could fully come down with, but once they did in 2008 and Colorado went there, you could tell it was sort of beginning to evolve that way for them. So to me, Colorado is going to be safe for Joe Biden, as will New Mexico. North Dakota, on the other hand, the Democratic Party in the Dakotas have had success here in the past. Kent Conrad, Heidi Heitkamp as recently as 2018, Tim Johnson not that long ago. There was a very competitive gubernatorial race here where Kristi Noem only narrowly defeated Bill Sutton. in that most recent governor's election. So these two states are going to be safe on the presidential level, but it's always interesting, I think, in particular South Dakota, to see how these end up. Nebraska, on the other hand, is a very firmly safe state for the GOP. Kansas, it's obviously interesting most recently in some of these statewide races. We saw what happened here in 2018 when Laura Kelly, the Democrat, defeated Chris Kobach. And the mere fact that there's a Democratic governor in the state of Kansas is a pretty big win for the Democrats. That was a bright spot in what was otherwise kind of a split decision evening for them in the 2018 midterms. But on the presidential level, we know what's going to happen. Oklahoma was one of two states, the other being West Virginia, in which Donald Trump won every single county in the whole state. All right, folks. The Lone Star State is, I think, basically the most fascinating state to talk about in this entire election. Okay, and just today, a poll was released by a very, very high-ranked and quality pollster. Now, there's a little bit of a discrepancy here in the reporting of this. Okay, one of them said it was the University of Texas at Tyler. Some of the news outlets reported that it was actually a Dallas Morning News poll. Now, 538 lists it as University of Texas as Tyler, but either way, both groups are the same grade under 538, so it really doesn't make a difference. The reality of the situation is, again, it's interesting. 538 has it, I'm looking now, as University of Texas at Tyler, whereas RCP, Real Clear Politics, has it as the Dallas Morning News, just as they have some other polls from Dallas Morning News involving the senatorial race here as well. But regardless, both of them have the same margin here, and it's Joe Biden +3. Joe Biden +3. That's a breakthrough, okay? That is, the floodgates have opened, I believe, at this point for Donald Trump. If he is not going to win the state of Texas, you can write a finish to this presidential election and to the Senate. Now, does that mean that John Cornyn is going to lose in this state? No. But it means the whole Republican Party is coming down with Donald Trump. If that is really the case, if he is really this close at all to losing this state, you got to believe that the Democrats are basically on the doorstep at this point. Now, why do I say that? Well, the reason is there's been a lot of enthusiasm in this state about the Democrats potentially winning here for some time now. Okay? And the reality of the situation is they've never been able to break through. As we've talked about on this channel, it's been a state that the Democrats can get a pretty solid and respectable vote share in. It's for a long time now. It's been a state that you can't call right away at closing hour. You have to really see what happens. It's a great run state Democratic Party. We know the whole story. And then, of course, in 2018, Beto O'Rourke, the congressman, the whole story out here in El Paso, gave Ted Cruz a real run for his money and came pretty darn close. 48.3% is the amount of vote share that he got. High turnout, high fundraising, the whole nine. Now, MJ Hager is obviously not going to do that against John Cornyn. Here's the thing, though. Beto O'Rourke never led Ted Cruz. Never led Ted Cruz. I believe there was one outlier poll from a low-ranked pollster, I believe it was Gravis or something like that, that actually showed O'Rourke leading Cruz by 1 point. Okay, so if your outlier poll has you leading by 1 point, you're going to lose. And he did. And so, to be entirely honest, the fact that I think Beto O'Rourke actually outperformed some of those margins, just as Hillary Clinton even outperformed the final margins. Because in 2016, Donald Trump went into that day leading by 12 points on average in Texas. He won by 9 points. So that's back-to-back elections where we've seen the Democratic Party a little understated here. 538 has these two candidates tied in Texas. Okay, so if you're a Republican right now, and I'm sure I have some Republican friends watching here, are you confident that Donald Trump is going to hang on to this state? Because we've seen back-to-back year elections where there's been a little bit of a shift in favor of the Democrats. We know that this is a state that throughout the election season has been very close. And now Joe Biden, with 9 days remaining, has a 3-point lead in a highly ranked pollster. And that evens the entire score at 538 as even. Okay, another stat for you. Now, this is a little outdated by now because this story came out 2-3 days ago. 47% of the amount of ballots that were cast in 2016 in the state of Texas have already been cast again in 2020. There's still 9 days until the biggest day of voting happens, okay? So turnout is astronomically high right now, and that boosts the Democratic Party. We know that Latino voters are coming out in full force, and this poll today, released by the University of Texas at Tyler and the Dallas Morning News, to me, for the first time on this channel, is going to make me put the state of Texas in Joe Biden's column. And that right there is kind of like a sobering thing. I was born and raised in Texas, okay? I was born and raised in Dallas. You know, all I ever knew was that Texas was basically just a safe Republican state. But again, you looked at the margins every election, you're like, huh, you know, that's interesting. You know, it's not necessarily the Republican Party's California. California is wipeout blue, as evidenced by these two characterizations. Here in Texas, El Paso, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. Okay, and the suburbs around those areas are pushing this state into Joe Biden's column right now. And I don't want to spoil the rest of this entire thing for you, but it's no secret that Joe Biden winning the state of Texas, this election's over. Now, in the state of Minnesota, obviously this has gotten away from the Republicans a little bit. This was a state that Hillary Clinton won by less than 2%. It was a plurality win for her. So it wasn't that impressive for her, but the Democrats have since then just put this out of reach. They won all 3 statewide elections in the 2018 midterms. Both Senate seats were up. Tina Smith won in a special election to hold on to the seat that was vacated by the resigned Al Franken. And Amy Klobuchar also easily won re-election, as we expected her to. And Tim Walz, the governor, also cruised to the governorship. So since then, it's obviously been pretty clear that the Democrats have the edge in this state. And they kind of did to begin with, even though it appeared to be shifting ever so slightly. Furthermore, polling has been consistent for Joe Biden, and I think that the last sort of little bit here for his cause, Biden's cause, is everything that we saw happen in the Minneapolis area. That's only going to help his cause and it hurt Donald Trump. Okay, we just know that turnout boosts the Democratic Party, particularly among African American communities. And so that to me is why the state of Minnesota, I'm going to label it safe. Now, on the presidential level, Iowa is not quite as close as it is on the senatorial level. It's an interesting state. It always is, every 4 years, every 2 years, really. We kind of circle back to this state. There was a relatively close governor's election 2 years ago that Kim Reynolds, the incumbent Republican governor, was able to win by about 6%, which was definitely a narrowing from the presidential race in 2016. Now, the Senate race here between Joni Ernst and Teresa Greenfield pretty much couldn't be any closer. I think the only reason that people, because it's basically a tie, I think the reason people are giving Teresa Greenfield the nod is because this, again, is a Democratic wave year, and the Democrats, in very, very tight elections, I think have reason to expect that they can begin to, take some of these races that are basically airtight. And so, as of now, I think that Iowa will still remain with Donald Trump, but again, only by a tilt margin. Missouri has been a state that's gotten away, kind of similar to Minnesota, away from the Democrats, though. Barack Obama came within 4,000 votes of this state in 2008. No cigar, then, and it's just shifted away from them ever since. And Claire McCaskill lost in 2018. So this, to me, as more of a likelihood characterization, will remain safe, as will Arkansas and Louisiana. Now in Mississippi, again, turnout will be high, and I think Mike Espy's presence in this state is going to help boost it for the GOP. He's giving it another try against Cindy Hyde-Smith, but I still don't quite see, look, it's only been a couple of years. There hasn't really been any major development of any kind to suggest that, there just hasn't been any development of any kind that would show that Cindy Hyde-Smith is any less electable, and she only was just a couple of years ago, even in a Democratic wave year. But as we know, This is a state where you have to be basically perfect if you're running as a Democrat. And, as good a candidate as Mike Espy is, he's not God. And that's only going to help Donald Trump's chances. So I'm going to label that safe. Now, in Alabama, and again, that's more of a likelihood characterization for Mississippi. In Alabama, I'm going to say the same thing. Now, again, the margins will be interesting here. And again, another popular vote state to watch. Because I think turnout will be high here, boosting Joe Biden's final numbers. Now, in Florida, it's always a tough state to get a real grasp on. Polling is wrong a lot in this state, okay? The Democrats usually seem to have the edge in this state in polling. For whatever reason, the last couple of elections have kind of shown the opposite. They've gone the other way. The Republicans have been able to edge it out. Remember, both Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum both won their elections, despite the fact, or Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott, I'm sorry, both won their elections in the 18 midterms, despite the fact that they both narrowly, but did trail in this state. Now, Michael Bloomberg recently committed $100 million towards boosting Biden's chances here. That's definitely going to help. A CBS News poll conducted and released just today, very, very high regarded pollster, had Biden ahead, but only by 2 points. 2 points. Okay, that's tight. And so, I mean, if you're the Biden campaign, you got to be pretty nervous because you've seen this movie before in this state. You know that this is a state you can never totally get a grasp of. It's a very, very big state. Biden's lead on average in RCP is 1.5%. Okay, that is close. That is close. Okay. Now, let's not forget that that's a shift from 2016. The polls were kind of right in a way. Again, we've said this before. The polls were far more correct in 16 than they were in 18, contrary to popular belief. When I say the polls have been wrong, they've been wrong in some of the statewide races, whereas they've mostly held true in the presidential races. And so Donald Trump led on election day by 1% in the state of Florida. So right now, that's a 2.5 point shift over these 4 years. Again, like, as we said, the Republicans had the edge here. I don't know why that just happened here. I haven't made a decision yet here. So by and large, I think both sides have reason to believe that they have an equal. This is kind of this is literally a toss-up in every sense of the word. You never exactly know how this is going to go. To me, this is a literal coin flip in the state of Florida. The only, again, though, when we basically come down on a knife's edge like this, you have to give it to Biden because right now, again, Democratic wavier, deeply unpopular incumbent president, a state that the Democrats have focused a huge amount of their efforts into. Turnout has been very high in Florida as well. This is a state that did vote to elect Joe Biden and Barack Obama 2 different times. So I think Florida will actually still stick with Joe Biden. Now, a similar CBS News poll today had the 2 candidates tied in the state of Georgia. Georgia is basically the exact same as Texas. You had another sort of upstart candidate running for statewide office in 16, just like Beto O'Rourke, that being Stacey Abrams. They both got basically the exact same share of the vote. Both of them have 2 Republican senators and a Republican governor. They're basically the exact same state. One's just over twice as big. Right now, I think Georgia, though, is still a tilt Republican state because I think that this has a little bit more of an identity than Texas does. And at the same time, the 2 Senate races here that I think are definitely going to boost turnout. Unfortunately, though, I think for the Democrats, what we're seeing is, even like there's basically just one major urban concentration in Georgia, and that, of course, is Atlanta and its suburbs. Whereas in Texas, as big as it is, there are like 6 of them that we mentioned earlier, and they're all growing very, very rapidly. So I still think Donald Trump will edge this one out in Georgia. South Carolina, very competitive on the senatorial level, but on the presidential level, I'm going to label it likely. Tennessee will be safe. Now, in North Carolina, another state that it's a little hard to totally get a grasp of because of the variety of races going on here. And, it's a little tough sometimes to gauge whether or not Joe Biden is outperforming the Senate candidate here, Cal Cunningham, or not. Now, recently, the reason he is outperforming him is because Cunningham's lead has shrunk due to his recent sexting scandal that we all know about. That same CBS News poll had Biden leading by 4 points in this state. which is definitely a win for him. It also had Cal Cunningham, who I just mentioned, up by 6 points. So clearly, these polls, if it wasn't such a lopsided, uh, result, I would say this is basically a biased pollster. Only CBS News / YouGov, they're one of the most highly regarded pollsters. So again, right now, Joe Biden has the edge in this state. He's going to be boosted by the fact that Roy Cooper is easily going to win re-election against Dan Forest. Roy Cooper is an extremely popular incumbent Democratic governor, very, very well liked within his state. So I see no reason that he is going to lose, and the polling has backed that up. Most recent polling, again, we go through it here: +6, +8, +4, -3, then +6, +8, +4, +4, and that's about it until the 22nd, in which it's -1, +3. So again, Biden has the edge, and Biden has the edge in the more highly ranked pollsters. So that is why, as of right now, I'm still going to label this tilt for the Democrats. Kentucky will remain safe for Mitch McConnell and the rest of the state on the presidential level, as will West Virginia, whereas in Virginia, that's going to be a safe Democratic state, as will Illinois. Now, in Indiana, this is a state, of course, that Joe Biden and Barack Obama managed to win, a little bit surprisingly, in 2008. But since then, it's kind of escaped them. And of course, the Mike Pence factor pretty much edges this one over the top. Now, in Ohio, another state that you can't always get a firm grasp of, but I think the reality of the situation is, I think the Biden campaign has run out of time ever so slightly here, because throughout the election season, we've seen a lot of polls that have them tied, down 2 points, up 1 point, right in that mix. But 6 months ago, 100 days ago, somewhere, if you want to go closer than that, let's say 120 days ago, if you're the Biden campaign, you're looking at those polls and saying, okay, we need to concentrate some resources here. And eventually, once we're in the last 3 to 4 weeks, we'd like to see us ahead there. Well, they haven't been able to do that. Okay, let's go through the polling because Trump has the narrow lead here. So +3, +1 again for Trump. +3, +1, +1, +6, +2, +2, +3, -1, +3, -1. So those are the most recent polls. Again, that kind of goes to show it's kind of like Georgia. The Democrats just haven't made that breakthrough here like they have in Texas and have in Arizona. So for that reason, I'm going to still label this tilt GOP. Now in Pennsylvania, another very important state in this election and its 20 electoral votes, the two candidates seem to basically be prioritizing this state over all else, okay? Again, Biden has the lead here, so we'll go through it again. +6, +8, +7, +6, +8, +7, +5, +6, +9, +3, +3, tie, -2, -2, +5, +5, +5, +10, +8, +7. Okay? So that's a lead for Joe Biden, no doubt. This is, of course, the state that he was originally from, Scranton. We get the whole, scrappy Scranton Joe. We know the whole deal. It's a state that I think both sides are very convinced that they can win, because this has basically been where all the campaigning has been concentrated in. And over this last week and a half or so, of course, we saw Barack Obama down in Miami just the other day. So right now, I think in the state of Pennsylvania, I know we sort of got a little off kilter here based on how we normally do it, west to east, but who cares? The Democratic Party's efforts have been concentrated in getting more turnout in the suburbs of Philly. Again, you know the whole drill by now. These three states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, was basically the deciding factor at this point. In 2016, Donald Trump carried all three of these states. He carried all the states that are in these tilt blues: North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Arizona. But right now, Pennsylvania, I think it's going to be closer than people expect. I have it as a tilt. Maryland will be safe for Joe Biden, as will D.C. Okay, now in Wisconsin. This was kind of the only state that was just flat out completely wrong in the polls. Again, we've heard a lot of whining over the years about how wrong the polls were, quote unquote, in this state. They really weren't that wrong. Okay, I just have to keep baiting that over the head. I know it's just they really weren't that wrong, guys. Wisconsin was really the only state where it was just a complete mess. Hillary Clinton led by just under 7% on election day here and lost. This was the only state that was just a complete shock. And this was the last state, I believe, that was called, that gave Donald Trump a called 270 electoral votes. So this was sort of the cherry on top for him. Um, since then, it's been very favorable to the Democrats. Real early on in Trump's term, I believe it was the first year, a Democrat won a state Senate special election, kind of in the southern portion of the state, and gave a Democrat that seat for the first time since the 70s. Of course, the governorship was a big win for them in the 2018 midterms when Scott Walker was upset by Tony Evers. That was a huge win for the Democrats on the gubernatorial level. They flipped 7 governorships that night. And then they also had some success in the Senate there as well. They were expected to, but it was still an important win for them when Tammy Baldwin won by about 11% against her opponent. And then earlier this year, I believe like around May or something, a Democrat won a Supreme Court race in the state of Wisconsin. That was a flip because the judge that held the seat before that was a Republican. The Republicans still have the majority on that court, but that was still a big win for them. And that was in spite of the fact that the pandemic had already been raging by that point, and 180 polling sites in the city of Milwaukee alone were reduced down to 5, and the Democrats still won. So all that combined with steady polling, to me, gives Joe Biden the edge here by a lean. Now in Michigan, it's kind of the same story. The Democrats had a good day here as well in the midterms. Gretchen Whitmer defeated Bill Schuette to flip the governorship from red to blue. Another big morale booster, I think, on the midterms for the Democrats that night. Gretchen Whitmer was able to pull that out. They also retained their senator there, Debbie Stabenow. She defeated John James, who, of course, as we know, is in a competitive race again, this time with the other senator, that being John James. But the Trump campaign for a while now has basically waved the white flag on this state and its 16 electoral votes. They've pulled their advertising out of there. They have kind of distanced themselves from John James a little bit. Any boost that James was going to get at the RNC was dashed, because of the whole virtual deal. So that's another state that I think is going to go Biden's way, and I don't expect it to be totally a nail-biter either. Delaware, another 3 votes will go his way, as will another 14 in New Jersey, 7 in Connecticut, 4 in Rhode Island. The state of New York, there's nothing to talk about there. Even the fact that it used to be Trump's home state doesn't really mean anything. It's one of the safest Democratic states in the country. It'll easily go Joe Biden's way. Another 11 votes will go his way in Massachusetts. This is obviously kind of becoming a little bit of a landslide here. Another 3 easy ones in Vermont. Now in New Hampshire, it was the closest state of all 50 in the 2016 election. And remember, Maggie Hassan, the senator that night, won her election by, you ready for this, 1,017 votes. Okay, but it does not get any closer than that. She's up again in 2 years, and it'll be interesting to see who the Republicans challenge her with, given that, that margin was so tight. But obviously, again, Democratic wave year polling's been very consistent. Jeanne Shaheen is up for re-election. She is not going to face any problems here. So there's another 4 for Biden. And then I think in Maine, we're going to get a little bit of a split decision here. 2 there will go Biden's way, 1 there, and then the 2nd district up here in the northern portion of the state, kind of the rural area of Maine, even though it's represented by a Democrat in Congress right now, will go to Donald Trump. So he'll pick up a vote there. So there you have it. I mean, that's kind of a landslide. And right now, guys, this is kind of the state of the election right now. There are 9 days left. And, Joe Biden here with 371 electoral votes compared to 167 for the Republicans. That's pretty substantial. And you look at the amount of flipped votes here. 11 in Arizona, 38 in Texas, 29 in Florida, 15 in North Carolina, 20 in Pennsylvania, 16 in Michigan, and 10 in Wisconsin, with very narrow losses in Iowa, Ohio, and Georgia. And still some, competitive showings as well in South Carolina. And, maybe to a lesser extent, I guess like Indiana maybe. The reality of the situation is this is kind of the state of this race right now with only 9 days left. And that poll in Texas pushed it over for me. That is what made it kind of move the needle sufficiently to give this for Joe Biden. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been a long campaign season, and we have 9 more days to go. and then all the real analysis will get started, if you can believe it. But thanks again so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the like button. Comment down in the suggestions below any questions, comments, concerns, corrections that you may have. Stay tuned for our 9-day senatorial election prediction video as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.